Before you judge me, let me tell you how I came to be here. The stitches from my surgery were still tender as I boarded that plane, slow, sore, but hopeful. I had paid for the trip myself, a final gift for my daughter, her husband, and the granddaughter I once rocked to sleep. We were in Florence, wandering down cobbled streets, sharing memories. Then, one morning, I woke up in an empty guest house. No voices, no luggage, no passporte. My wallet was gone, and on the bedside table was a single, folded note that read, "She deserves nothing. Let her stay." They abandoned me alone in a foreign country. Back home, they sold my house, my home, for £650,000 to fund their year-long sabbatical. They told people I was losing my mind, that I preferred to live with little, that I deserved the crumbs. I didn't scream. I didn't chase them. I made one move, just one, and I upended the world they had stolen from me. They thought I would fade away, but now, they are the ones with nowhere to go. The black cab pulled up outside a beige, soulless apartment block I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought Jasmine, the driver, had the wrong address. I asked why we were stopping here, my hands fussing with the handbag on my lap. After 2 months in the rehabilitation center, I had dreamt of this moment. The return home to my garden, to the rooms filled with memories of Arthur, and of the children when they were small. Jasmine caught my eye in the rearview mirror, her dark eyes filled with a confusion that seemed to echo my own. She told me my son had given her this address, that this was where I would be staying now. The world tilted slightly, as if the earth had shifted on its axis without warning. For 43 years, I had lived in the same cottage in a small Dorset village overlooking the sea. The house Arthur and I bought when Liam was 5, and still hid behind my legs when strangers came to call. The house where I planted my first rose garden, where I raised my children, where I held my husband's hand as he slipped away. There must be a mistake, I murmured, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Jasmine switched off the engine and turned to face me fully. Over the last 3 weeks of her driving me to and from appointments, I had come to appreciate her quiet honesty. The way she didn't treat me as if I were fragile just because I'd had a minor stroke. She asked if I wanted her to call Liam. As if summoned by his name, my son appeared from the building's entrance. At 39, Liam still had that charming grin he'd used to get out of trouble since he was 6. But there was something different about it now, something brittle I couldn't quite place. He called out to me, rushing towards the cab with his arms outstretched, exclaiming that I looked incredible, that the country air had done me a world of good. He hugged me as I stepped out of the vehicle, but the embrace felt rehearsed as if he'd practiced the gesture in a mirror. Liam had always been theatrical, but this felt calculated. I asked him what this place was, gesturing to the grim building behind him. I thought we were going home. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Well, Mom, circumstances changed while you were away. He explained he'd had to make some decisions. I asked what kind of decisions. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took my small suitcase from Jasmine's hands and started towards the entrance. Just then, Chloe appeared in the lobby, wearing a slip of a white dress that likely cost more than my monthly pension. Her smile was even brighter than Liam's, if that were possible. She called me darling, kissing my cheeks with lips that smelled of vanilla gloss, telling me this place was perfect for me, so much more appropriate for this stage of my life. Stage of my life? The words hung in the air like cigarette smoke. The flat was small but clean. 1 bedroom, a basic kitchenette, a microscopic bathroom. The windows overlooked a car park, not the ocean. There was no room for my books, my botanical pressings, the photographs from 30 years of research. There was no space for Arthur's desk, where I still kept his notes on coastal erosion. I asked where my things were, my voice remaining strangely calm despite the panic that was beginning to crawl up my throat. Oh, we kept the essentials, Chloe said, waving a dismissive hand, the diamond on her finger catching the fluorescent light. The rest was, well, just clutter, accumulated over the years. 43 years of a life reduced to clutter. Liam cleared his throat. He told me to sit down, that we needed to talk. I sat on the small, stiff sofa, Jasmine remaining by the door as if sensing she might need to make a quick escape. Liam sat opposite me, leaning forward with that earnest expression he used to wear as a teenager when he'd broken something valuable. The house was just too big for you, he began, especially after the stroke. And the upkeep was so expensive. The council tax, the maintenance, the gardening. I told him I tended my own garden. He countered that I couldn't do that anymore. Could I? His voice had a patronizing edge I'd never heard before. He said he had to be practical, to think about my future. Future. Another of those words that sounded different coming from his mouth. I asked him what he did. Chloe shifted nervously by the window, checking her phone. Liam took a deep breath as if preparing to dive off a cliff. He sold it. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Not immediately painful, but one of those blows that steal your breath, the real ache coming later when the shock fades. I asked him what he sold. The house, Mum. I sold the house. It was the right thing to do. The world became very quiet. I could hear the hum of the tiny refrigerator, the distant traffic, my own heart thudding in my ears. Jasmine took a step forward but said nothing. You couldn't do that, I said finally. Not without my consent. Liam and Chloe exchanged a look. Technically, he could, Liam said. He reminded me that I'd given him power of attorney before I went to rehab, for medical and financial matters. For medical emergencies, I whispered, to pay the hospital bills. Chloe chimed in that the documents were quite broad, that Liam had to interpret them as best he could, given the circumstances. The way she said circumstances made my skin crawl, as if I were a circumstance to be managed. I asked where the money was. Another look passed between them. Liam rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd inherited from his father. Well, there were a lot of expenses. My medical bills, the rehab costs, this flat. And Chloe and I are investing, he said, in our future, in our business, their travel blog and YouTube channel that had been on the verge of taking off for the last 5 years. That I stood up slowly, my legs still a little unsteady, but my mind had never been clearer. I wanted to see the documents, the power of attorney, the sale papers, everything. Liam laughed, but it sounded forced. He told me not to worry my head about all that it was all handled legally. I just needed to focus on getting better. I repeated my demand, my voice firmer now. Chloe sighed dramatically, telling me I was letting my emotions cloud my judgment, that Liam did what was best for everyone. You can't live in the past, she added. The past. As if 43 years of a life were just nostalgia to be discarded. Jasmine cleared her throat softly, asking if I wanted her to stay a little while. Before I could answer, Liam cut in, saying that wouldn't be necessary, that his mother could manage on her own now, and that he and Chloe were only a phone call away. I asked where they were living now. Chloe's eyes lit up for the first time. She announced they were going traveling. Europe, Asia, South America. They were going to document it all for their channel. It was going to be amazing. Traveling, I thought, with the money from my home. I asked carefully where they would live when they came back. Liam waved a hand. We'll figure it out. We're young, we're adaptable. We're not like, he trailed off, not like people who cling to houses that are too big for them, that they can no longer maintain. Chloe finished for him. I nodded slowly, as if I were considering their words. In reality, I was calculating. 40 years as a botanist had taught me to observe before acting, to gather data before forming a hypothesis. I understand, I said finally. Liam seemed surprised by my calmness. He said it had been a long day, and he thought I probably needed to rest. They stood up, clearly relieved the confrontation had ended so quickly. Liam kissed my forehead. Chloe gave me another hug that reeked of expensive perfume. And then they were gone, their voices fading as they walked to their car. Jasmine remained, watching me carefully. She asked if I was all right. I sat back down on the stiff sofa and looked around the small, sterile flat. No, I wasn't all right, but I wasn't defeated either. Jasmine, I said, could you do me a favor? Of course. Could you get me a computer, a laptop? And I also need to find some documents I have in a safety deposit box. Her eyes lit up with understanding. She asked if there was something I wasn't telling her. I smiled for the first time all day, a small but genuine smile. Liam isn't the only one who knows how to plan for the future. That night, Priya's voice was exactly as I remembered it from her university days. Clear, direct, with no room for nonsense. She said of course I was all right. It had been years. I settled into the unfamiliar sofa, surrounded by walls that were not mine, breathing air that didn't carry the salty tang of the sea. I admitted that I wasn't sure I was. I told her I needed her to come, and I needed her to bring everything she had on Arthur's trust. There was a pause. Priya had been my brightest student 20 years ago, a brilliant young woman who'd taken my botany class and stayed behind to ask questions that challenged even me. Now she was one of London's most respected trust solicitors. She asked where I was. I gave her the address of the flat, hearing the faint scratching of her pen as she took it down. She said she'd be there in an hour. And Rose, she added, if someone is messing with Arthur's documents, they are going to live to regret it. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness, arranging my thoughts as I used to arrange my press specimens. Every detail had to be catalogued, examined, and put in its proper place. Liam had said the power of attorney documents were quite broad, but I remembered exactly what I had signed. A limited medical authority, and power to pay bills directly related to my hospitalization. Nothing more. I had been specific because Arthur had taught me to be. Never sign anything you don't fully understand. He told me after we'd seen too many retired colleagues fleeced by their own families. And always keep copies. An hour later, Priya knocked on the door. At 42, she had maintained the same poised posture and penetrating gaze she'd had at 20. Her dark hair, once a solid sheet of black, was now threaded with silver streaks she wore like a badge of honor. Her suit was a sharp, tailored thing of deep charcoal wool that probably cost more than the flat's deposit, and the crisp white silk shirt beneath it hinted at a body kept as disciplined as her mind. She embraced me firmly, her perfume a subtle, expensive scent of sandalwood and steel. My God, Rose, she said, you look well for someone who's just come out of rehab. I explained the stroke was minor, more of a fright than any real damage, but apparently, it was enough for Liam to decide I was incompetent. Priya set her leather briefcase on the small dining table and studied me with those eyes that had intimidated more than one opponent in court. She told me to tell her everything. I told her about waking up in the flat, about Liam's vague explanations, about the house being sold without my knowledge. Priya took notes in a yellow legal pad, asking precise questions about dates, times, and who was present for each conversation. I asked if she'd brought the trust documents. Better than that, she said, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase. I brought Arthur's original trust, every amendment you made together, and something else I think you'll find interesting. She opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. My heart quickened when I saw Arthur's familiar, spidery handwriting in the margins of some of the papers. She asked if I remembered the last time we updated the trust. It was 6 years ago, after Liam had lost that job at the tech startup. I remembered. He'd come home asking for money, talking about an investment opportunity that turned out to be another get-rich-quick scheme. Arthur had been furious, not about the money, but about the lie. Priya continued, explaining that Arthur had added some specific protections. One clause required my written, notarized consent for any sale of real estate. Another specified that the medical power of attorney did not include financial authority unless I was declared mentally incompetent by 2 independent physicians. Which meant, she concluded, her voice sharp as broken glass, that if Liam sold your house using only the medical power of attorney, he committed fraud. I felt as if the air had returned to my lungs for the first time in days. I asked what we needed to prove it. The original power of attorney I signed, the sale documents for the house, and any communication I'd had with Liam about the subject. She asked if I kept copies of what I signed before I went to rehab. I smiled for the first time since the phone call. I asked her if she remembered the first lesson I taught in my botany class. Document everything. Nature doesn't lie, but data can be misinterpreted if you don't have all of it. Exactly, she said, and that lesson doesn't just apply to science. I went to the small wardrobe in the bedroom. At the back, behind the few clothes Liam and Chloe had deemed essential, was a shoebox they had apparently overlooked. Inside was my personal filing system, copies of every important document, organized by date in manila folders labeled with my neat, careful script. Incredible, Priya murmured as she reviewed the papers. Here's the original power of attorney, clearly limited to medical decisions and the payment of hospital bills. She paused, holding up a document I didn't recognize. And what's this? She frowned as she read it. It's an amendment to the power of attorney. Dated a week after you went into rehab. It expands Liam's authority to include all financial and real estate matters, as deemed necessary for the principal's well-being. I told her I never signed that. The signature looks like yours, she said. I took the document and studied it carefully. The signature resembled mine, but something was wrong. I pointed it out to her. Look at the R in rows. I always make a small, open loop at the top. This one is closed and falls straight down. Priya pulled a small magnifying glass from her briefcase and examined the signature. You're right. And look at the date. Do you remember where you were on the 15th of March? I thought for a moment. I was already in the rehab center. I was admitted on the 10th. Then it's impossible for you to have signed this on this date at that solicitor's office in Poole. Priya's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. It's my private investigator, she said. I asked him to do some preliminary digging into the sale of your house. She answered the call. What have you found, David? I could hear a man's voice talking rapidly on the other end. Priya's face gradually hardened. I understand. Yes, document everything. We need photographs, dates, any witnesses you can find. She hung up and looked at me with an expression I recognized from her student days, when she discovered something particularly fascinating under a microscope. Rose, your house was put on the market on the 18th of March. 3 days after you supposedly signed that amendment. 8 days after you entered rehab. I asked how quickly it sold. That's the interesting part, she said. It sold for cash well below market value, to a buyer who had apparently been waiting for that specific property. The transaction closed in a week. A chill that had nothing to do with the flat's poor insulation crept over me. A buyer who had been waiting? Priya explained that David was investigating, but it appeared Liam had been talking to estate agents about my house since before my stroke. There are emails, she said, dating back to January. January, 2 months before my stroke, when I was still perfectly healthy, living in my own home, tending my own garden. He had been planning this, I whispered, before I even got sick. Priya nodded grimly. It seems your stroke was an opportunity, not the catalyst. Her phone rang again. This time it was a local number I didn't recognize. Rose? It's George. George Bunce, your neighbor. My sweet, widowed neighbor who had promised to keep an eye on my garden while I was away. I asked how he got this number. Jasmine gave it to me. Rose, I need to talk to you. There are things you need to know about what happened while you were gone. I asked if he could come here. He said he was already on his way. 20 minutes later, George was sitting in my tiny living room, holding a manila folder and looking angrier than I had ever seen him. Rose, I took pictures, he said without preamble, of the for sale sign, of the movers emptying your house, of Liam and that girl of his directing everything as if they owned the place. He opened the folder and spread a series of photographs across the table. My heart clenched at the images of strangers carrying my furniture, my books, my memories. This one's from the 20th of March, he said, pointing to a photo of Liam talking to a man in a suit. And this is from the 22nd, when they put up the sold sign. For days? Priya asked. It sold in 4 days? Less than that, George said. The for sale sign went up on a Friday. By Tuesday it was sold. Priya and I exchanged a look. I asked George carefully if he'd overheard any conversations between Liam and the buyers. Better than that, he said, his grimace softening into a determined expression. I recorded them. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Immediately, Liam's voice filled the small flat. No, she won't be a problem. She's in rehab. I have full power of attorney. The house is clear of any claims. And after the sale? A strange man's voice asked. After the sale, she'll be comfortably settled in a place more appropriate for her age. Trust me, this is for the best for everyone. George paused the recording. There's more, he said. A lot more. Priya leaned forward. "George, would you be willing to testify about what you saw and heard?" "Madam," he said, "that night, after George and Priya had left, I sat with all the documents spread out before me. The evidence was stark. Liam had forged my signature, lied to the buyers, and emptied my home while I was vulnerable in a rehabilitation center. But more than the legal betrayal, it was the personal treachery that carved a hollow space in my chest. This was the boy I had soothed through nightmares, the one I had taught to ride a bicycle, the child I had held in my arms as he wept over his father's death. I picked up my phone and dialed Jasmine's number. I asked her if she was still awake. She said, of course, asking if I was all right. I told her I needed to ask for something that might be complicated. She told me to name it. I asked if she could get me information on Liam and Chloe's recent spending. Their social media, their credit card statements if possible. Anything that showed what they'd spent my house money on. There was a pause. "Rose, are you sure you want to know?" I was sure. She said all right, but that she already knew part of the answer. Chloe had been posting pictures of their new life on Instagram. Expensive hotels, 5-star restaurants, designer clothes. And yesterday, she'd posted something from the airport. They were going to Thailand. Thailand. On my money. They were living the life they had always dreamed of while I sat in a one-bedroom flat surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal. But as I looked at the documents scattered on the table, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not the blind hope that everything would magically be fixed, but the cold, calculated hope of a scientist who had found the exact evidence she needed to prove her hypothesis. "Tomorrow," I said to the empty walls of the flat, "tomorrow we start to fix this." And for the first time since I had returned to Dorset, I slept soundly. The next morning arrived with the sound of my phone vibrating insistently on the bedside table. It was 6 a.m., far too early for social calls. The number was international. "Mum?" Liam's voice sounded distant, with that tinny quality of cheap international calls. "Can you talk?" I sat up in bed, fully awake despite the early hour. "I'm here, Liam." "There's a problem," he said, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine worry in his voice. "My credit cards were declined last night, and my PayPal account is frozen. Do you know anything about this?" I smiled in the darkness of the small flat. "Why would I know anything about your financial problems, Liam?" "Well, because technically some of those funds came from the trust and I thought maybe you'd, done something." There it was. The admission that he had been using the trust money without authorization. What kind of something could I possibly have done, Liam? After all, I'm just a confused old woman living in a flat my children chose for me. There was a long pause. "Mom, you don't sound confused at all." "No, Liam," I said. "I'm not." I hung up the phone and immediately dialed Priya's number. "Good morning, Rose," she said. "I was just about to call you. I filed an emergency injunction last night. All assets from the trust are now frozen pending the outcome of the fraud investigation." I asked how she did it so fast. She explained that when you have evidence of document forgery and elder fraud, judges tend to act swiftly, especially when the evidence is as clear as what we had. I got up and went to the small window, looking out at the car park where, just a few days before, I had expected to see my garden. I asked what the next step was. "Now," she said, "we document everything. Every penny they spend of your money, every lie they told, every misstep they made. And Rose, there's something else you need to know." "What?" "I contacted the estate agent who handled the sale of your house. He's willing to testify that Liam specifically told him you were mentally compromised and would never be living independently again." The tea I had been sipping suddenly tasted bitter. Mentally compromised. His exact words, according to the agent, she said. "He also said they needed to sell quickly because your condition was worsening." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. 40 years of botanical research had taught me that the most dangerous creatures were often the ones that looked most harmless on the surface. "Priya," I asked, "can you get me a copy of everything Liam and Chloe have posted on social media since they left for Thailand?" She told me she was already on it, that Jasmine had sent her some links last night. "It's quite revealing," she added dryly that an hour later. Jasmine arrived with a borrowed laptop and a grim expression. "You're not going to believe this," she said, opening the computer on the small dining table. The screen filled with Chloe's Instagram posts. Photo after photo of extravagant meals, luxury hotel suites, champagne glasses clinking against tropical sunsets. But it was the captions that made me tremble. Living our best life. No more burdens. Financial freedom. Dream travels. Finally free to chase our dreams. Sometimes you have to make the hard choices for the good of everyone. New life, no regrets. And then, under a post from Liam on a beach in Thailand. Sometimes family holds you back. Sometimes you have to do the right thing for them, even if they don't understand. Hard decisions. Family first. Do you see this one? Jasmine asked, pointing to a more recent post. She posted it yesterday. It was a picture of Chloe in an expensive restaurant, with a caption that took my breath away. Liam made the tough calls I couldn't. His mum is better off now, in a place appropriate for her condition. Sometimes love means letting go. Hashtag devoted son, hashtag tough decisions, hashtag family first. They're creating a narrative, I murmured, making themselves look like heroes who made difficult choices for my own good. Jasmine nodded. But look at this. The comments are starting to turn. She scrolled down. At first, they were the typical fawning replies. So brave. Good for you. But the more recent ones were different. Wait a minute. They sold his mother's house without telling her? This sounds like elder abuse. Is anyone else concerned? My grandmother went through something similar. This isn't right. How can they be on holiday with her house money while she's in a flat? I asked what happened, why the opinion had shifted. Jasmine smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. George, as it turns out, has a few friends in the village who are very active on social media. And when they started sharing the real story about what happened to you, well, the internet can be very righteous when it comes to elder abuse. My phone rang. It was Priya. Rose, are you watching social media? I am now. Well, there's more. A reporter from the Dorset Echo contacted me this morning. Apparently, someone tipped them off to the story. They want to do an interview. About what, specifically? About the rise of elder fraud in the county, using your case as an example. Without mentioning specific names, of course. Unless you want to. I thought for a moment. All my life I had preferred privacy, the quiet work in the lab, the discreet tending of my garden. But perhaps it was time to make some noise. Schedule the interview, I said. But I want it to be at my old house. Your old house? Rose, I don't think you have access. I will. After hanging up, I dialed a number I had found in the sale documents. Mr. Chen? This is Rose Sterling. I believe you bought my house. There was a pause. Mrs. Sterling, he said, his voice gentle. I didn't know how to contact you. We've been very concerned since we learned about the circumstances of the sale. What do you mean? Well, when we bought the house, your son assured us you were in agreement with the sale, that you had moved voluntarily to a smaller place. But then, when the neighbors started telling us the real story, what real story? That you didn't know the house was being sold. That you were in rehab and he acted without your consent. Mrs. Sterling, we never would have bought the house if we had known this. I felt something akin to hope blooming in my chest. Mr. Chun, I asked, would you be willing to cooperate with an investigation into the sale? Absolutely, he said. And Mrs. Sterling, if there is anything we can do to help, anything at all, please tell us. In fact, there is something. Would you allow me to do an interview in the garden tomorrow? For a newspaper article on elder fraud? Of course, he said. And Mrs. Sterling, we've been taking care of your garden. We were hoping you might come and see it one day. That evening, as I reviewed the final documents Priya had prepared for the case, my phone vibrated with a text message notification. It was from an international number. * Mom, please call me. There's been a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Liam. * I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Jasmine, who had been working quietly on the laptop, looked up. Rose, there's something else you should see. She turned the screen towards me. It was a recent post from Chloe, but this one was different. No luxury photos or cheerful captions. Just text. * There have been some misunderstandings about our recent family decisions. Sometimes social media doesn't tell the whole story. We ask for privacy during this difficult time. Asterisk, they're scared, Jasmine said. The comments are tearing them apart. And the interview in my old garden was perfect. The reporter, a young man named David, captured every detail. The roses the Chens had meticulously cared for, the bench where Arthur and I used to sit on Sunday afternoons, the small glasshouse where I had cultivated specimens for my research. The main photograph for the article showed me sitting among the flowers I had planted with my own hands, my expression serene but my eyes resolute, as I explained how I had lost everything while I was recovering. The article ran on a Tuesday morning with the headline, "Retired Botanist Fights to Reclaim Stolen Home." By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. By evening, 3 local television stations had called, asking for interviews. But the real victory was happening in a quiet courtroom in Dorchester. "Are you ready, Rose?" Priya asked, touching my shoulder gently. I nodded, smoothing down my navy blue dress. It was the same one I had worn for my retirement ceremony from the Botanical Institute when my colleagues had honored me for 4 decades of meticulous work. It seemed fitting to wear it today. "Remember," Priya murmured as we entered the courtroom, "let the facts do the speaking. You don't need to shout to be heard." The room was smaller than I had expected, with worn wooden paneling and a faded green carpet. Liam and Chloe were already seated on the other side of the aisle with their solicitor, a nervous young man who looked like he'd taken the case on short notice. Liam looked different. His tropical tan had faded, replaced by a grayish pallor that aged him by 10 years. Chloe wore a conservative dress I had never seen on her social media, but she couldn't hide the flicker of irritation in her eyes when she saw me enter. Judge Williams was exactly what you would expect. An older man with a shock of white hair and an expression that suggested he had seen every kind of familial betrayal over the years. "We are here today," he began, "to determine whether the medical power of attorney granted by Mrs. Rose Sterling to her son, Liam Sterling, gave him the authority to sell real estate, specifically the family residence in Dorset." Priya rose first, presenting our case with a surgeon's precision. She showed the original power of attorney documents, clearly limited to medical decisions. She presented the forged amendment, along with the forensic analysis of the signature. She explained the specific protections Arthur had built into the trust. "Your Honor," she said, holding up a copy of the forged document, "this amendment was supposedly signed on the 15th of March, when Mrs. Sterling had already been in a rehabilitation facility in Wiltshire for 5 days. It is physically impossible for her to have been at that solicitor's office in Poole on that date." Liam's solicitor stood to object, but Judge Williams held up a hand. "Do you have evidence that Mrs. Sterling was elsewhere on that date?" Priya smiled. "Yes, Your Honor. We have medical records, visitor logs, and testimony from the rehabilitation center staff. Furthermore, we have this." She presented a photograph that surprised even me. It was me, sitting in a physical therapy session with a date and timestamp clearly visible in the corner. This photograph was taken on March 15th at 2:30 p.m., exactly 30 minutes after the power of attorney amendment was supposedly signed in Poole. I glanced at Liam, expecting to see shock or remorse. Instead, I saw something worse, calculation. He was whispering urgently to his solicitor, still looking for a way out. "Your Honor," Liam's solicitor said, rising, "my client acted in good faith, believing he had the authority to make decisions for his mother's well-being. Mrs. Sterling had suffered a stroke, and there were genuine concerns about her ability to manage such a large property. Can you document those concerns?" the judge asked. "Well, my client can testify as to conversations he had with his mother's doctors." "Are you willing to testify under oath that Mrs. Sterling's doctors recommended the sale of her home?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause. "Your Honor, we can call the doctors if necessary." "Excellent idea," the judge said. "In the meantime, let's proceed with the testimony we have available." Jasmine testified first, her voice soft but firm, describing my state of mind in the weeks after my return. "Mrs. Sterling was completely lucid," she said. "Confused by the situation, of course, but mentally sharp. She remembered specific details about documents she had signed, dates, conversations. There was no indication of cognitive decline." George was next. In his late 60s, with his straightforward honesty, he was a perfect witness. "I saw the whole thing," he said simply, The for sale sign went up on the 18th of March. By the 20th, there were moving lorries. By the 22nd, it was sold. I never saw Rose during that whole time. And believe me, in 40 years of being neighbors, Rose never made a big decision without talking it over with me first. Then he played the recordings he'd made on his phone. Liam's voice filled the silent room. No, she won't be a problem. She's in rehab. I have full power of attorney. The house is clear of any claims. I saw Liam go pale as his own voice betrayed him. When it was my turn to testify, I rose slowly, walked to the stand, and placed my hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Priya guided me through the basic facts. My career, my marriage to Arthur, the purchase of the house in 1982, my minor stroke, my time in rehab. Mrs. Sterling, Priya said, when you signed the medical power of attorney for your son, did you understand that you were giving him the authority to sell your home? Absolutely not. I gave him authority to make medical decisions if I was unable, and to pay bills related to my hospitalization. Nothing more. Why were you so specific? My husband taught me to be. He had seen too many cases of families taking advantage of elderly relatives. He told me, Rose, never sign anything you don't fully understand. And never give anyone more power than you absolutely need to. Did you ever discuss selling the house with Liam? Never. The house was my home. I had planned to live there for the rest of my life. Liam's solicitor rose for the cross-examination. Mrs. Sterling, isn't it true that you had expressed concerns about maintaining such a large house? No. Isn't it true that your son was worried about your safety, living alone? If he was worried, he never mentioned it to me. Isn't it possible that you may have forgotten conversations about the sale, due to your stroke? I straightened in my chair. Young man, I spent 40 years as a botanist. My work required a precise memory for thousands of specific details. My stroke was minor and did not affect my long-term memory. I can recall every significant conversation I had with my son for the 6 months prior to my stroke. There were no conversations about selling my house. But you must admit, maintaining that house was expensive. More expensive than paying for me to live in a flat while my son and his wife spend the proceeds on luxury hotels in Thailand? Priya objected, but the damage was done. I could see the expressions on the faces of the judge and the court staff. When Liam finally testified, his story unraveled quickly. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. The house was too big, too expensive to maintain. My mother needed something smaller, more appropriate. Did you discuss this decision with her? Priya asked. Well, no, not directly. Did you ask her what she wanted? She was ill. She wasn't in a condition to make major decisions. According to whom? Did her doctors recommend her house be sold? Not specifically, but... Mr. Sterling, is it true that you had been exploring the sale of your mother's house since January, 2 months before her stroke? Liam paled. I don't recall exactly. Priya produced copies of the emails her investigator had found. Emails between Liam and estate agents, dating back to January, asking about the market value of properties in the area. How do you explain these emails, Mr. Sterling? I was being proactive, researching options, just in case. In case of what? In case your mother conveniently became ill and you could sell her house without her knowledge? Objection. Liam's solicitor shouted. Sustained, the judge said, but his tone suggested he'd heard enough. Chloe's testimony was brief and even less convincing. She admitted she had encouraged Liam to take action, but insisted they thought it was for the best. For her best or for your best? Priya asked. Objection. Withdrawn. But the question hung in the air. When all the testimony was finished, Judge Williams leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. Mrs. Sterling, he said, in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many cases of elder financial abuse. Most involve victims who truly cannot defend themselves. You clearly are not one of those victims. He paused, arranging his papers. It is clear to this court that the medical power of attorney did not include the authority to sell real estate. It is equally clear that the amendment to the power of attorney was forged. Most disturbingly, the evidence suggests premeditation. Mr. Sterling had been planning this sale long before his mother became ill. I looked at Liam. His head was bowed, his hands clenched in his lap. Therefore, the judge continued, this court rules that the sale of the property in 3 days after the verdict, I was back in my garden. The Chens had been more than gracious during the transition. They had not only meticulously cared for every plant but had also made a few improvements. A new drip irrigation system for the roses and a small, burbling fountain where a patch of dry earth had once been near the glasshouse. We want no reward, Mrs. Chun had insisted when I tried to offer them money for the improvements. Your garden brought us peace during the months we lived here. Consider it a gift. Now, sitting on the bench where Arthur and I used to plan our weekends, I breathed in the familiar scent of roses and jasmine mixed with the salty breeze from the sea just 2 blocks away. For the first time in months, I felt whole. My phone vibrated. A voicemail. It was Liam. Mom, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but if there's any chance we could talk just once, please. His voice sounded different. It lacked the artificial confidence he had carried for years, and the manipulative desperation he had displayed from Thailand. It just sounded tired. Human. I considered deleting it, as I had all his previous messages, but something in his tone stopped me. I dialed his number. Mom? His voice was small, childlike. I'm here. Could you meet me? Just to talk. I promise it's not to ask for money or a second chance or anything. I need to talk to you. I looked around my garden, at the flowers I had planted with my own hands, at the house I had almost lost forever. Come to the house, I said. Your old house. Are you sure? Come alone. Without Chloe. She's not here anymore. She left after the trial. Of course she had. Rats always desert a sinking ship. Come in an hour, I said, and hung up. I spent that hour preparing myself mentally, as I used to before important scientific conferences. What did I want to achieve with this conversation? What did I need to hear from him? What did I need to say? When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before opening it. Liam looked terrible. He had lost weight, had deep circles under his eyes, and was wearing the same wrinkled clothes he had worn in court. More than that, he had lost the confident posture he'd carried since adolescence. He looked small. Hello, Mum. Hello, Liam. We stood in the entryway for an awkward moment before I gestured for him to come in. The house looks exactly the same, he murmured, looking around the living room. The Chens took good care of it. We walked out to the garden in silence. Liam sat on the ground beside my bench, the way he used to as a little boy when he would come to me with problems from school or bad dreams. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just listened to the sound of the new fountain and the distant cry of the gulls. Where's Chloe? I finally asked. She left. With some bloke she met in one of those fancy hotels in Thailand. Someone with real money, she said. Money that didn't depend on. He trailed off. Fleecing the elderly? He nodded, not looking at me. I suppose I always knew what kind of person she was. I just didn't want to admit it. Why, Liam? The question came out softer than I had intended. Why did you do this? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when he was 8 and had broken something valuable. Because my whole life I felt like I was living too small. You and Dad, you were always so content. With the modest house, with simple holidays, with a quiet life. And I wanted more. More what? More everything. More money, more adventure, more recognition. I wanted to be someone important. Not just the son of a retired botanist who lived in the same house for 40 years. His words hurt more than I had expected. Were you ashamed of us? No. Yes. I don't know. He looked up at me for the first time. Not of you exactly. Of myself. For never achieving anything on my own. For still depending on you even as an adult. So you decided to take what you wanted. I decided I deserved a chance. And when you had the stroke, I thought it was a sign. An opportunity to finally do something big with my life. By robbing me, I didn't think of it as robbing. His voice rose for the first time. I thought I was helping. Giving you an easier life while I chased my dream. With my money. With money that was eventually going to be mine anyway. The brutal honesty of that statement hung in the air between us. I said softly. There it is. What? The real truth. It wasn't about my well-being or doing the right thing. It was about you wanting your inheritance now, while you were young enough to enjoy it. Liam was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. I suppose so. I nodded. At least now we were speaking honestly. Liam, do you remember when you were 8, and Dad died? His expression softened. Of course. Do you remember how you used to come into my bed in the middle of the night because you had nightmares? Yes. And I would let you stay, even though I knew you needed to learn to sleep on your own. Because you were my baby, and your pain was my pain. Tears began to well in his eyes. Do you remember what you promised me, one of those nights? You were maybe 9 and you'd had a particularly bad dream about me dying too, and leaving you all alone. I promised I'd always look after you, he whispered. You told me, Mummy, when I grow up, I'll always make sure you're okay. I'll never let anyone hurt you. Liam was crying openly now. You promised it with that solemnity that only children have when they make promises they truly mean to keep. Mum, I'm not finished. I need you to understand something, Liam. I am not broken because I lost the house. Houses can be recovered. I am not broken because I lost money. Money can be earned. I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eye. I am broken because the boy who promised to protect me became the man I needed protection from. His sobs now racked his entire body. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did. You betrayed me in the most profound way possible. You didn't just take my home, Liam. You took my trust that the people I love would not harm me. Can you ever forgive me? The question I had been waiting for. The one I had been preparing myself to answer. I already have, Liam. He lifted his head, shock replacing the grief in his eyes. What? I forgive you. I forgive you because holding on to resentment corrodes the soul, and my soul has had enough corrosion these past few months. So, can we try to fix this? Can I come home? No. The word was firm, without doubt. Forgiving you does not mean I trust you. Forgiving you does not mean I will expose myself to be hurt again. Forgiving you means I release you from my hatred, but not from the consequences. But I'm your son. Yes, you are my son, and you will always be my son. But you are no longer my little boy who needs Mummy to fix everything. You are a grown man who made adult decisions, and now you have to live with adult consequences. I stood up from the bench and walked over to my handbag, which I had left on the patio table. I took out a business card and handed it to him. What's this? The Dorset Housing Resource Line. They help homeless individuals find temporary shelter and job services. You're giving me the number for a shelter? I am giving you the tools to rebuild your life. Honestly, from the ground up. The way I had to when I was your age and lost my husband. Liam stared at the card as if it were a foreign object. That's it? After everything we've been through together, that's all you're going to give me? Liam, I gave you love. I gave you an education. I gave you values. I gave you opportunities. I gave you 39 years of support and guidance and forgiveness. I gave you everything a mother can give. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. What I will not give you anymore is the chance to hurt me again. He sat on the ground in my garden for a long moment, turning the card over and over in his fingers. And if I change, if I become a better person, I hope you do. I sincerely hope you do. But you will have to do it for yourself. And you will have to prove it to yourself, not to me. Do you hate me? The question came out small, vulnerable.
No, darling.
I don't hate you. I love you. I will always love you. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I am done enabling you. Liam got to his feet slowly, looking around the garden one last time. Can I write to you sometimes? To let you know how I'm doing? You can write. But do not expect replies until you have proven you have truly changed. And not for weeks or months, Liam. For years. He nodded, finally understanding that this was truly the end. I love you, Mum. I love you too, son. But loving someone doesn't mean you let them destroy you. I watched him walk to the side gate of the garden. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the consequences he was finally facing. At the gate, he turned one last time. Mum, Do you think Dad would be disappointed in me? The question broke my heart in ways all his betrayal had not. Yes, Liam. I think he would be very disappointed. But I also think